I did not see your texts
Oh,
with the links for the show tonight. I was like, what is Michael doing?
I sent them last night. Yeah,
I was like, is this colored people's time? Is that what's going on here? You know, low expectations is a form of bigotry, Michael. And so I'm not going to say, it's because of, your people's culture.
Italians.
Boxers
Oh,
and drummers. You know what I'm talking about.
what do you call a drummer without a girlfriend?
I don't know what.
Homeless.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Ouch. As a former drummer, I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a drummer and a savings bond?
What?
A savings bond will eventually mature and make money.
So are these your plans? You're planning on like a perpetual childhood, a little Peter Pan thing? Is that why you chose this career?
If the shoe fits.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I mean, I have long advocated a rejection of adulthood as a politics. I mean, that is basically my politics. Although recent years have challenged that, as real anarchy has descended upon the land. I have slowed down in my rush toward a renegade utopia.
Mhm.
But
The big one that challenged it for you was fashion, right?
how so?
Oh, the one point that you really like Paglia on is how she talks about how everybody dresses like boys nowadays.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, that's part of my. I guess it's conservative. I have sort of I've had some conservative moves, which is relevant given what happened on Unregistered this week. Historic moment. For many years, people have heard me say over and over again that I did this podcast interview with Killer Mike. Was it 7 years ago now? An amazing, one of the best conversations I've ever had. And it was Mike's podcast. He was in the process of producing for Huffington Post. It was going to be a history of Reconstruction. And they flew me to Atlanta to do it. And it was just a remarkable, remarkable conversation, as anyone who listens to this week's Unregistered will find out, because finally, after years of begging the producers to let me air that episode, because his podcast never took shape. They just were sitting on this gold for years. They finally gave it to us, and we published it to the public. Patrons have been able to listen to it for several weeks now, by the way. But yeah, so we put it out in public, and it's gotten a great response so far. But I recommend listening to that for many reasons, and one of them is you can sort of hear me in my pre-disillusionment with contemporary Black politics phase. So this was, I guess we did it in like 2014, 2015. So this is right when BLM is just taking off. Like Trayvon Martin had just happened. Mike Brown, I think, had just happened, basically. And I was still, as were most people, utterly immersed in feelings about Black people getting shot by police. I mean, anybody who was political in those years, 2014, 15, 16, right there, knows that was the, one could say, hysteria of the time. And I was absolutely a part of it.
This is 2015 Black Lives Matter hysteria.
Yeah.
Which, a lot different than 2018, 2020 Black Lives Matter hysteria.
Well, that's when we, for one thing, really thought Michael Brown was shot by the cops, like, unjustly. Like, we really did think that. We thought Trayvon Martin was unjustly shot by George Zimmerman. Both things, I think, are now completely untrue. In fact, I'm utterly positive about both things. In particular, Trayvon Martin, because I'm slightly embarrassed that I talk in these ways with Mike on this show. But again, it was before we knew so much. I had Joel Gilbert on my show a few years ago, who did this documentary on Trayvon Martin. And it's just, I mean, it's a mountain of evidence that he totally was beating the living shit out of Zimmerman, probably intending to kill him, that he was quite the thug in many ways, that witnesses lied on the stand during the trial. I mean, there's no question. And there's a lot more forensic evidence that Joel brings. So and he is He's basically a propagandist, Joel Gilbert, for one wing of the Republican Party. I guess it's sort of the Ted Cruz wing, if there is such a thing. So, a lot of his work I find to be, not so useful. But he's just dead right on this. Anyway, so it's amazing if you listen to this interview, I guess it's 2015 with Mike, Killer Mike, and then listen to my episode of Joel Gilbert a few years later, it's like night and day. And this is the one issue I've said before. Criminal justice and race, that issue, that's the one major issue that I have changed my views on considerably, mostly because I found out that a lot of what I believed was a lie, was total nonsense, that a tiny number of unarmed black men get shot per year. And even of those, the ones who were absolutely non-aggressive toward the police is small, single digits. So yeah, so Mike and I'm going to have to throw this. Hang on, give me 1 second. I got to do one thing.
Yeah, for sure. This is the Killer Mike episode 263 on Unregistered.
Yes, released this week. But yeah, it's an amazing interview. I mean, that's not mostly what we talk about. The interview is mostly, almost entirely about U.S. history in the 19th century, especially after the Civil War, during Reconstruction. And the reason that Mike wanted to bring me on was he found out that I had done work on the history of Black violent resistance to racism, and which is a really rich history. And especially during that time, during and after the Civil War, most ex-slaves and most even free Black people in the South owned guns and knew how to use them. It's the South, and it was an agrarian society where everyone had to have guns, and they used them. And so I found numerous instances in the newspapers of the time in the South. This is segregated South, basically, or post or Reconstruction South. It's on the way to segregation anyway. And the racists are real. These are real ex-Confederates who really want Blacks to be enslaved. And you will find, if you look through the newspapers across the South during that period, that there were countless instances of Black people shooting back at the Klan, sometimes shooting back at the local sheriff, often shooting back at sort of random racists on the street. And that history continues all the way through the Civil Rights Movement. And I've written about that a lot in Renegade History and elsewhere. So he was really interested in that because Mike is interesting in that he's a progressive sort of social democrat in terms
Bernie
of economics. He's a big Bernie supporter. I think he probably differs with Bernie on foreign policy a bit. But yeah, he's essentially that type politically. However, he's also similar to Bernie. He's a big proponent of the Second Amendment. And Mike loves his guns, and especially he loves the idea of Black people not being victims, neither being actual victims nor identifying as victims. Because that's sort of Black history in a nutshell. It went from being actual victims to identifying as victims. And so guns and the history of that violent resistance is crucial. I mean, if it happened even under slavery, even under Jim Crow, even during the Klan, even under all that, which it did, then he says, there's no reason Black people can't fight back now, if there is any such thing as, violent racism. And when we did this interview, it felt to most people like we were living in a land where the cops were hunting Black men. I don't think that anymore, but there certainly has been actual violent racism historically, and not even that long ago. So it's an amazing interview. Mm-hmm. Check it out.
Yeah, what's fun about Killer Mike, I think Glenn Beck said this once, that when he's looking for political allies, all he really cares about, Glenn Beck did at this moment, was the Bill of Rights. If you like all 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights and you're good on them, we can build something together. And Killer Mike always talks about definitely the First Amendment, definitely the Second Amendment, definitely the Fourth Amendment. He's solid on the Bill of Rights. And yeah, he sees it as something that can actually empower all citizens of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, Mike is even though he has sort of social democratic ideas on economics and possibly sort of political power generally, he wants a great deal of democratic participation by people, and he wants, of course, the state to be empowered and to own and direct, major portions of the economy. So that's where he and Bernie are the same. But he also, as I said, he has a libertarian streak with his embrace of the Second Amendment, which is really, to me, just a fucking anti-infantilization streak. That's why I love about that whole tradition of Black resistance, Black violent resistance in particular. And what Mike's getting at is, no, we're not babies who need to be protected by the white man. Yeah. So Mike also has some classical liberal in him, which is partly libertarian, right? And so he's interested also and believes in the advancement of what we call sort of natural rights that are encoded in the Bill of Rights. And so his politics, turns out, he's found a pretty sweet spot, because Mike is friends with, like, he used to be on the Independents. This is Camille Foster and Matt Welch and Kennedy's show back in the day. It was the last like real libertarian show on cable news, and I used to be on it a lot. Mike was a regular on there, and he was also a regular on MSNBC. And he has serious conservative friends, and because a lot of conservatives love that stuff about, Black self-determination and self-defense and rejecting victimhood. That's a beautiful sort of conservative idea. So Mike's, I mean, there are very few people who are on MSNBC who I would even talk to. So yeah, he's a remarkable guy. And then again, he also, his education blew me away. I knew he was smart. I knew he was political. I knew, he would have plenty to say, but he actually blew me away with his knowledge of history. So we really went deep really fast, and it's pretty cool. Also a great guy, nice guy. Showed up smelling like a bag of weed.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. Really loves his wife. That's another reason the conservatives like him. He's a total family man. He owns businesses in Atlanta. He owns a barbershop that's one of the biggest barbershops in the ATL, which is saying everything. Because I mean, how many barbershops are there? Black barbershops are there in the ATL? I can't even imagine. And yeah, he really does just love his wife and his family and his kids, and he raps about those things, as well as, killing niggas. He raps about that too. He's also, by the way, and I haven't even said this yet, like, I hadn't really listened to him or Run the Jewels much, like barely at all, before that interview. And as soon as I got home, of course, I started listening to it, and like immediately they became like my favorite rap group, hip hop group. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think the production is like the best in hip hop. It's the last good Gen X original rap duo. I mean, they're basically my age, a little younger, still doing it, and still original. So Mike's amazing.
Yeah. On the Black resistance tip, you mind if I ask you about the Tulsa quote massacre that you refer to as the riot? Because I think there's kind of a misconception about this. It's a little relevant. Scorsese's Killer of the Flower Moon came out and referenced that very heavily. And like right after I watched that, I'm like, what was Thad's take on the Tulsa quote massacre again?
Mm-hmm. No, I don't call it a massacre. I never have. In fact, the reason that I used to, I had a sort of a major psychological issue for about a year or two when I was teaching at Columbia because of it. The first time I gave a lecture about it, the Tulsa, whatever you want to call it, riot, massacre, I think it was a war, Tulsa War of 1921. The first time I gave a lecture on it, when I got to the part where the blacks shoot back, I started crying. Or I choked up. I didn't cry, but I started choking up badly. And then from then I was terrified of lecturing. I thought I'd choke up. But anyway, it's because It's because there was so much violence in both directions. And I forget the numbers, but a significant number of whites got killed in it. And you'll see that in all the so-called race riots of that era. So-called Red Summer of 1919, in which there are major race riots in most of the big cities, like big, violent, deadly, lots of people get killed, mostly blacks, but a huge number of white people got killed in Red Summer and in Tulsa. So it was not a massacre. It was a war. And also in Tulsa, what was interesting about it was that under Jim Crow, this is true for every southern city, there was a vibrant black business community and vibrant black commercial district or multiple districts, all 100% black owned, black employees, predominantly black clientele, doing very well. These weren't major national corporations, but these were vibrant, local, thriving businesses. And there was a very solid, sizable, fairly wealthy and powerful black middle and upper class in every southern city because of that. So Tulsa had one of the most successful black business districts, and I think it was it called Little Wall Street or Black Wall Street? I think it was called Black Wall Street. Yeah. And the theory is, I don't know how much I buy this actually, but the theory, the left version of the story is that the whites in Tulsa were so jealous or envious of the black success that they invaded Tulsa and set fire to buildings and killed people and ended up dropping a bomb basically out of a biplane. They flew an airplane over the black neighborhood and dropped an incendiary device that I think burned a whole block and killed some people. Yeah, there was an actual bombing in it. So it was a definite war. But again, the blacks had militias formed. And again, libertarians need to study this thing and see what's up, because there is a whole lot of black activity in 1921 in Tulsa that every libertarian would stand up and cheer for. They formed militias to defend their homes and businesses and families, and successfully, in many cases, fought back. You know, it's about as American a story as you can get, and should appeal to every American, white, black, liberal, conservative, libertarian. But it was, as all of these things, it began with an alleged sexual assault or attempted sexual assault by a black man on a white woman. This precipitated every major race riot in American history. And Tulsa was the same. And it involved, I believe it was some encounter between a black man and a white woman in the downtown of Tulsa. I want to say like in an elevator or something like that. Doesn't really matter. We don't know, of course. It's disputed whether he was guilty or not. I have said on this show and elsewhere many times that many, and probably I would bet most, of the victims of lynching were actually guilty of rape. And I don't know about this guy, but if you just look at if you actually examine the cases themselves in the history of lynching, you'll find that pretty clearly most of these guys were guilty as hell. They weren't lynching black people just to lynch black people. If they wanted to do that, they had millions of black people all around them they can lynch in any moment. No, they chose to lynch people they thought were rapists, and they often were. This is not to justify lynching, but it is to say that the story is much more complicated. So in Tulsa, I don't know, and I wouldn't be surprised if the guy actually tried something, you know. But when news hit that a black man had attacked a white woman, that's when the assaults began, the attacks began on the black business district, but also black residential areas. The whole black portion of Tulsa came under attack until they started fighting back. But it was a nasty death toll. I forget the numbers. But yeah, no, a significant number of whites lost their lives in that. And that's something we should all remember.
Mm-hmm. And then another part that isn't told is that block was rebuilt pretty quickly. And W.E.B. Du Bois revisited it in 1926 and said it was very thriving. And you almost couldn't tell that something had happened to it 5 years ago.
I mean, so imagine a town, right? Imagine, by our standards now, a smallish town, but, you know, large enough to have like a real commercial district in it, in which every single business basically, like on the street that you would see, every storefront business that you would see, and many more. There were banks, there were insurance companies, all black owned. There were fucking HMOs, basically the equivalent of health organizations, right? Like doctors, hospitals, black owned. So imagine a city of say 50,000 or so, 100,000, in which every business is thriving because the entire population is dependent on those businesses because they can't shop in the white businesses. And, imagine this goes on for decades, which it had since slavery, since 1865, in the South anyway. In the North, it's longer than that, but in the South, since 65, these people, ex-slaves and former freedmen too, were building businesses, creating businesses, protecting businesses, all of them gun owners. This is what libertarians fight for. This is what conservatives fight for. That is the world they say they want us all to live in. Talk to a trad on Twitter. They're constantly talking about this little like idyllic shire in which all the businesses are local and thriving and everybody frequents them and everybody knows each other and supports each other. That's black neighborhoods in the Deep South under segregation. It's just one of the paradoxes in American history. Yeah, it was Jim Crow. Yeah, segregation. And segregation was what we think it was, essentially. But it was also the period in which arguably there was greater black social and economic and political power than ever, including now, including when Barack Obama was president, because we know who he represented, and it wasn't the black business districts. During that time, black people in those cities locally had serious power. And that's demonstrated by the fact that you couldn't just rampage through a black neighborhood like in Tulsa and get away with it. So it was actually integration. It was Brown v. Board of Education and integration and the civil rights movement in the 1960s and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that stuff that essentially destroyed that black, vibrant, parallel economy, which was also a parallel society. It was almost like there was an Atlantis right next door to America the whole time.
I think it's the first episode of Killer Mike's show, Trigger Warning, on Netflix that came out in 2019, where he raises the question that perhaps segregation was better economically for the black community at the time because...
Yeah, Mike's all over this. Yeah, I mean, when I said this stuff, he's like, yeah, he was like ahead of me already. He was like, yeah, I know. He's like, yeah. And he went on at length about how it was better under segregation for blacks in many ways. I mean, it was better in the sense, as I said, that there was more consolidated political and social power, which is, here's a parallel. I mean, Hamas has a lot of power in Gaza, in large part, because they're sealed off from the rest of the world. And that was what segregation did. I mean, their police didn't go into black neighborhoods in the 50s and 40s and 30s and 20s, right? Why bother with what the niggas are doing? Like, let them kill each other. Generally was the idea. There weren't like regular patrols in the black neighborhoods. So there was a high degree of autonomy, not to mention the fact that they all had guns and everyone knew they had guns. And I've found in the archives and in the newspaper records, countless examples of Klansmen coming to some black house trying to kill the guy because they thought he did something with a white woman, and like his wife coming to the front door with a shotgun and shooting over the Klansmen's heads, and the Klansmen running away in terror and then filing a police report against her. Complaint. I mean, this is common, doing this against cops. In Birmingham in 1963, the really famous march that ended up with the fire hoses and the dogs biting people, that there were people, what precipitated that was black people who came to watch what Martin Luther King was doing. They came to watch and they saw all these cops and they started throwing rocks and bricks and bottles at them. And there were a couple of stabbings and 6 or 7 cops went to the hospital that day. People don't talk about that. That's what started it. That's why Bull Connor called out the dogs, is that there were all these people wilding out on the cops And I'm on their side. Don't get me wrong here, but they leave out the whole part about the violent resistance actually getting the job done. And again, here's another parallel to Gaza. Let's do that. Let's talk. So the thesis in my book, Renegade History, is that it was that, and I've written this elsewhere too. It was that violent resistance that dated all the way back to slavery and was prominent as hell during the civil rights movement and actually gave the civil rights movement its power, its energy. That's my argument. Now, what that violence did, that violent resistance did, it resulted in the successes of the civil rights movement, which transformed America. Whether you like it or not, everyone agrees that this was revolutionary. And the way we think about race and the way we legislate about race and the way that people are treated in all spheres is absolutely radical. I'm arguing that all that came from black folk kicking ass on the streets, quite literally. And there's a lot of evidence for that we can talk about. Now, it occurred to me, and it's sort of been, I've just been seeing it unfold. It's been amazing. The effects globally and within the Middle East and within Gaza, for that matter, the effects of the October 7th attacks by Hamas. What they have accomplished is nothing short of galactic. Is damn near like some Marvel Avengers movie climax. Think about what has happened as a result of October 7th. The annihilation of 20,000 souls in Gaza is maybe the least momentous part of this. The geopolitical shifts and the shifts in Israel and the shifts in the Middle East, I mean, it's so big and so fast, it's hard to keep track of. But the main thing is that we had this UN General Assembly vote just happen for a ceasefire, another one. Well, this is the General Assembly this time voting for it. So it's all the countries in the UN voting for a ceasefire. 153, I think it was. 153 countries voted for it. 10 countries voted against it. And 23 countries abstained, which I find hilarious, the abstentions on such questions by nation states. No, we don't really have an opinion. Of course you have an opinion. It's just political. Now, everyone can probably guess who the 10 against this were. Yes, it was the United States and Israel, and then Austria. I'm not sure what's going on in Austria. And then the rest, the other 7 who voted against this were like all from Micronesia, basically, from the Pacific. There were tiny Pacific islands who want to keep their military bases there. So they vote however the US tells them to vote. But look at that. It's down to, in the world community, so-called, among nation states, among states, it's now down to 3. It's down to the US, Israel itself, and Austria are supporting this war, are not opposed to this war. They're the only people who are not opposed to this war. 153 other countries voted to stop the war. Now, what is also incredible about this vote is that, I'm going to get this right, Canada voted for a ceasefire. Canada. They do what we tell them to do. What the hell? France voted for it. Multiple NATO countries voted for it. The UK abstained, which is itself monumental because the UK is even more of our slave than Canada is. On questions of foreign policy, the UK does not deviate from what we're up to. They do not. This is huge disobedience by the major allies of the United States. That's how bad it is that the UK and Canada and France and half of NATO, all of NATO basically, is now opposed to this war, but not the United States. We are so isolated, meaning the state, the United States of America as a nation state, are so isolated that it's come down to, besides Israel itself, these handful of teeny tiny countries, and then a handful of intellectuals, public intellectuals in the US, some of whom are my friends. the people on Twitter. That's all Israel's got now. I mean, the ICE, and then if you want to talk, and then you want to talk about the people who were already skeptical or hostile to Israel or anti-Zionist. I mean, and I include myself among them because I wasn't really an anti-Zionist before October 7th. I didn't want to help Israel in any way, and I saw Zionism for what it was, but wasn't anti. I was sort of non-Zionist. But I've heard from many, many people like me who had a similar position on it. We've all become anti-Zionist because this thing is now, this country, Israel, and this ideology, Zionism, is actually threatening, as I said in recent weeks, World War III. It's bringing us to the brink. We have aircraft carriers in the Middle East. Yeah. Do you need to know anything more? There are aircraft carriers deployed to the Middle East as we speak. And then there's, Iranian missiles being fired at United States military bases in Iraq and Syria as we speak. It's all you need to know. Oh, and Israel's at war, by the way, as this is going on. And this is all because of that ethno-state that we've been supporting for 56 years. Since the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza began, the United States has been propping that thing up. Oh, my. So anyway, the isolation is scary, too, because the Netanyahu government, the current government of Israel, as I think everyone knows by now, isn't playing around and has made it very clear that they are going to take Gaza, at least northern Gaza. They're going to take it, and they're going to reconquer it or conquer it. And they're not going to stop until they achieve that end, because everyone knew that they could never defeat Hamas by what they were doing. So we knew that was a lie. And it wasn't genocide either necessarily. But it certainly was ethnic cleansing. They wanted to get those Palestinians out of there entirely so they could take it over. For both national security purposes, which, is logical, but also more importantly for Zionist purposes. The Zionist ideology says that Gaza is part of the land of Israel. The Zionist ideology says that right there is part of the land of Israel. And if you're like a real Zionist, or if you're a militant Zionist, like everybody in the Netanyahu government is, that land is ours, the Jewish land. And those people are interlopers. The people who have lived there for 2,000 years are interlopers. That's how the settlers talk. That's how the right wing in the government talks. They talk about Palestinians as if they have no right whatsoever to live on this land that they've been on for 2,000 years, growing olive trees in the same place for 2,000 years. That is the ideology. It's the stated ideology of the current government. So everybody in the world sees this, except for 20 or 30 intellectuals on Twitter and the US government. Now, what will happen when the Netanyahu government notices this? Notices that they are all alone, that the whole world now really hates them. Now, they've had pariah status before, but never to this degree. They've never lost everybody like this. Western Europe was pretty staunch ally of Israel, regardless of what they did. And there certainly was never a movement as large as we have in the US or the Western Europe now, not even close. This anti-Israel, anti-Zionist movement is the biggest thing going. It's as big as what was happening. It's bigger than the Iraq War movement. I think it might be more numerous, more people in the streets, and just more people shouting about this and more people upset about it than even that. When they find out, when Netanyahu, I mean, I think, of course, they know this and they're probably panicking about it. Or if they're these like settler, apocalyptic, millenarian types, right, who believe in the second coming, or whatever. Maybe they welcome it, but apocalypse is upon us. And as I said last week, Alistair Crook believes, and he knows this region better than anybody because he negotiated for both sides, Israel and the PLO, for years and years and years, and did hostage negotiations. And he's been a MI6 diplomat and spy for decades. He knows this region extremely, lives there, and he lives in Beirut. He said that his reading of both sides is that this is a revolutionary moment for both sides. For the Israeli government, they're revolutionaries. These are settler right-wingers who believe that all of that land should be 100% Jewish and the Palestinians should be expelled completely from it. And Hamas, the current Hamas leadership, is also revolutionary. Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, he's trying to bring about, he's trying to bring about a revolutionary change in not just Gaza and Israel, but in the Middle East. Now look what happened. It's happening. I mean, this is very likely to be happening, and we'll see. But there is so much movement and so much war going on, and the Yemenis, the Houthis, are now involved militarily, attacking Israeli ships, and now Israel is saying if the U.S. doesn't take action against the Houthis in Yemen again, now directly, Israel has officially asked the U.S. government to go to war with the Houthis because of this. Everyone should know that. Yeah, and they have said no, but better than that. I mean, this is the Israeli government. This is the Netanyahu government. Netanyahu said, if you don't do it, we will have to take action ourselves. Meaning, if you don't go to war with the Houthis, we will go to war with the Houthis. They are a pit bull, and we have the leash. But right now, the guy holding the leash of the Israeli pit bull is Joe Biden, a tottering, teetering, falling down old man who I'm sure wouldn't have the slightest clue as to how to stand up to Bibi Netanyahu in a meeting, a one-on-one, or a phone call. And I think that's a lot of what's going on. The crew who run the joint, Biden, Sullivan, and Blinken, there's a lot of soy going on there. I mean, I think this is actually important.
I think the person actually getting stuff done is Blinken, and Blinken's a sycophant for Netanyahu.
Well, Blinken also seems to be tortured. That guy looks so bad now, and he seems like he doesn't sleep and seems like he's crying all the time. He must be under so much pressure. Long Zionist family, by the way. The Blinkens go way back, generations as Zionists.
Oh, and his father-in-law, what's that connection to
Ukraine?
Yeah,
Ukraine. He's got Zionist and Ukrainian connections. Ukrainian, not good connections. Ukrainian nationalist connections. He managed to be both a Zionist and connected to fascists in Ukraine. Just like Zelensky, it can be done. Zelensky, by the way, was always chosen by the ultra-right as a shield. They understood that if they had a Jewish president like him, they couldn't be accused of being anti-Semitic.
Oh, this is what I was getting at. The stepfather of Anthony Blinken was Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer.
Oh, okay, right. I guess I did know that. Yeah.
Samuel Pizar, yeah.
Pizar, yeah.
So it's a big Mossad connection there.
But the geopolitical analysts I listen to and read, they all say this all the time, and I used to sort of poo-poo it because it's sort of a great man view of history that I don't like. It's like history's not decided by people's personalities. It's decided by like ambition and goals and objectives and organizing people to achieve those. But I think in this case, it's actually true to some extent. I think the very weak, so weak personalities and intellectually weak personalities of those three guys, I do think is giving Netanyahu a very long leash with which to kill people. Holy shit, man. It's very clear. They're really trying to clear the entire place. It's really clear. And that didn't become super clear until just a couple of days ago. Now we're seeing how much civilian infrastructure they're blowing up. Like basic stuff. like greenhouses and farms and schools. The big UN school in the northern part of Gaza, where apparently a lot of people from Gaza were educated there, and it's a thing, and they just blew it right up.
Or what is it? The Al Azhar University that got blown up.
Oh, yeah, the biggest university. And they killed this guy. I did not know, Rafat Al-Arir, I think his name is. He was, and like the whole left wing on Twitter on Palestine has been in tears over this because they all knew him, and he was. I mean, it's interesting. I'd be surprised if he didn't do some work with Hamas. His brother, I think, was definitely Hamas. It doesn't matter to me too much. I want to know exactly what you do in Hamas, and there's all sorts of different types of people in Hamas, and all sorts of different reasons people have for being in Hamas. Some are psychopathic, sadistic, anti-Semites, fascists. Some are, and some are like this guy, I think, who's just he speaks English, he writes English, he has a website in which he writes about Gaza.
Are you talking about Rafat Al-Arir?
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody on the left I know has been just completely distraught about this. Max Blumenthal and others have accused Barry Weiss of essentially murdering him. This might be a stretch, but it might not be a stretch. She singled him out, Rafat, in a tweet thread about a week ago, I think, because he made some joke about, somebody said they burned babies in ovens, which we know is wrong and bullshit. And then he said on Twitter, Rafat said on Twitter, with baking powder. And then she tweeted that out as sort of like proof that these people are animals and savages. Because she said, here's a professor in Gaza saying things like this. What he was doing was making fun of the propaganda, of course, and making fun of the lie, because there was no baby burned in an oven, baked in an oven. She tweets this out in a tweet thread. She's got a huge Twitter account. She's got deep connections to the Israeli government. So everybody in the Israeli government follows her. They have cited her. They're championing her. All the major Israeli press talks about her now. She's the leader. She is the leader. She and Ben Shapiro, but she's a bigger leader. She's the leader of the Israeli American community right now. And so then Rafat, as a result of that, and he tweeted these out. He showed these, a string of just amazing death threats from what look like IDF soldiers. They're Israelis, at least. They're young, they're men, they look like they're men, they're Israelis, Israeli names, talking about raping his wife and his children, anally raping his wife and his children, and stringing their bodies up, and one after the other like this. The idea, everybody's on Twitter now, and Barry Weiss is huge on Twitter. If you're in the IDF, there's a very good chance you will see Barry Weiss on Twitter. There's no doubt. And so they think that there's a very good chance, Max Blumenthal and company think there's a very good chance that this is why he got targeted, that Barry Weiss pointed him out to the gang that is occupying Gaza right now. It's plausible to me. To single out a civilian who live, if you have a huge account like that, and to single out as evil a civilian who lives in Hamas in Gaza right now on Twitter, I would think that's a little irresponsible, unless you know for sure he did something bad. But she was accusing him of making a bad joke. Think about that. Like, it's when an occupying army is right there next to him, and I'm sure they would love any excuse to kill people in Gaza who they think are Hamas or Hamas sympathizers, or who are, these animals who think it's funny to burn Israeli babies. I think it's entirely plausible. It's certainly, what she did was irresponsible in a way that I think is breathtaking, because it is actually life-threatening what she did. I'm not saying she necessarily realized that when she tweeted that out, but it just seems to me obvious. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who lives in Gaza, and Barry Weiss is tweeting out that you're an animal and you want to kill Israeli babies, what are the chances somebody in the IDF is going to want to take a shot at you? Because now they have a shot at you. They have your address. They know where everybody lives. They control the population registry in Gaza. They knew where his sister lived. That's where they killed him. I mean, yeah, I think she did. I think she did finger him. Maybe inadvertently, but I think that's what happened.
Well, I think the bigger story this week is the safety of Jews on American college campuses. That's the real people who are at risk here.
It's funny, I hadn't even thought about this. My son is a Jew on an American college campus. It's just, I gotta tell you, Michael, the dead kids in Gaza make me up, as you know, make me cry. But what my son is going through as a Jew in America at the University of California, no one even knows he's a fucking Jew. And they would never know unless he wore a goddamn Israel flag while Israel is slaughtering children, which is what happens. What happens on these campuses is that the local Zionist, pro-Israel student group, there is one on every major campus, does some protest or demonstration or just walks around with big old Israel flags all over themselves at the very moment that Israel is killing children, hundreds of children per day. And so people say stuff to them. I mean, it's a regime. Yeah. So that's what's going on. Anyway, yeah, the hearings.
Yeah. Do you think the question? I mean, the big question, the big gotcha moment was the presidents of Penn and MIT and Harvard were all asked, is calls for the genocide of Jews protected speech on campus? And they all answered more or less, it depends on the context. Is that a fair question to ask? Is that a fair response?
I mean, come on. Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't even be, it's not worthy of even that kind of respectful setup. I mean, this should be like, all thinking people should reject this out of hand. The entire premise and setup and framing of this by Stefanik and all these motherfuckers who are trying to conflate Zionism with Judaism and anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. It's the most fraudulent, corrupt attempt at a psyop I've ever seen, except it's more than a psyop because it's resulting in actual policy that effectively makes illegal criticism of the state of Israel. That's what that is. On Penn, at the Penn campus, from what they've said, it's not allowed to say Palestine should be free from the river to the sea. You're not allowed to say that. There is a video of a former Mossad agent, senior Mossad agent, who worked in basically their psychological operations department. She's a woman. I think it was done in the 80s, but it was on like PBS. It was on the major networks. This is not some fringe thing. And people might have even seen this, but you can look it up. Hasbara is what they call Israeli propaganda. It's their own name for it. And she said that, yes, since the 1970s, it has been standard policy for us to insist that any criticism of Israel is actually anti-Semitic, because we knew that it would instantly discredit any criticism of what we do. I'm telling you, this government, all governments are mendacious. This government is of a next level. They do it in well, you've seen the way they deployed the propaganda about the hospitals. I mean, people were laughing at them. And that was to me the turning point in the whole thing. When I saw that happen, when I saw most people laughing at the IDF's propaganda about the hospitals, I knew that they were done. I think that's the turning point in world history. I don't think Israel comes back from this. I think too many people hate their guts now. I know that everyone I know will never forgive them for this. I mean, that the hatred will never subside goes for the US government too. There is no way there will be any interest in compromise or affection for the state of Israel for the vast majority of the world. So the percentage of the Earth's population whose governments voted for a ceasefire is 90%. 90% of the Earth, basically, through their representatives or so, voted for a ceasefire. Oh, and what? 2/3 of Americans are for a ceasefire. I think it's probably 3/4 by now. So even the big country that voted against the ceasefire is totally divided on it. What is Netanyahu and the insane fascist who replaces him going to do in response to this? When they look around and they see that they truly are now the pariah state, that the whole world hates them, not just all the nations right around them, but now, and if not the governments, the people of the United States, the people of the United Kingdom, the people of Europe hate them now. We've gone from being non-Zionist to anti-Zionist. Like, you've got to go. It's an emergency. You're killing kids by the minute. There are kids under rubble as we speak. Like, every minute for the last 2 months, there's been children dying under rubble because of them. You can't, and they're not stopping, and they're not even saying they're going to stop. And we know what their objective is. It's either killing all of Hamas, which they can't do, or it's taking all of Gaza, which they can do with total ethnic cleansing and the killing of, how many? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people would that require? They're not going to stop. They've said so. They're run by fanatics. Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Netanyahu himself, the agriculture minister, these are all outright, explicitly racist fascists who have said they want to ethnically cleanse Gaza and make it the land of Israel because they believe the Bible tells them so. This is their argument, their only argument for why they should do this. I'm not exaggerating. The right wing in Israel, this is their ideology. They don't need any other argument other than the Bible says this is ours. Which even, of course, many theologians dispute whether the Bible says that. But like, even if it does, like, that's it. That's all they've got is the Bible. So you can't argue with that. You can't negotiate with that. These are fanatics by definition who won't stop until that whole landmass is what the Bible says.
Well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that all nations turn against Israel. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of their identity of being singled out as a minority. And the more the rest of the world hates them, the more they need Israel because they can't go anywhere.
Wow. The most beautiful summation of Jewish neurosis I've ever heard. That's it. It's like this self-perpetuating sadomasochistic cycle. It's wild. Yeah, Henry Kissinger said, I think in 1975, he said that Jews have a tendency to create the historical conditions that they most fear. And he said something about like World War I. He said, as during World War I, they have a tendency to create what they most fear in the world. Basically, I think assigning some blame to Jewish bankers for the rise of Hitler.
What was Kissinger's ethnicity? What was?
Yeah, he was in the fold pretty deeply. Yeah, no, he was in Holocaust Germany. He was in the 30s in Germany as a baby. But yeah, he was quite literally a Holocaust survivor. and a no bullshit one, by the way. So a lot of the ones you hear about are bullshit. Turns out, no, he's a real deal. Yeah, I mean, his whole family was in Berlin in the 1930s. Say no more. I think they left in 35, 34, 35. Yeah. So he knows of what he speaks. Yeah. It's too bad Kissinger killed so many people. I mean, he could have been my hero. I mean, the analysis is right.
Mm-hmm.
The analysis is right. The policy prescriptions are what the problem is with Henry.
Mm-hmm.
But the realist analysis is what we want, though.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we're going to lash out and go to war like he did.
Mm-hmm.
He just misjudged the power of communism in Southeast Asia. He just thought it was more powerful than it was. I think he believed it. I think a lot of them just really believed that this thing was going to take over and fuck us up.
Also, a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't get Pol Pot if you don't bomb Cambodia into hell.
God, man. You know, The Killing Fields. Did you ever see that movie or read it?
No.
Read the book. It was like a big Hollywood movie, I guess, in the 80s or 90s. And it's, it's a typical Hollywood big studio movie, but it's about that. And that's when I learned back then. I was a kid then when I saw it, I think. That's when I learned that basically I put two and two together. It was like, oh, Kissinger's responsible for Pol Pot. The United States bombing what became the killing fields. I mean, killing so many people and destroying so much of that country, created the perfect conditions for a totalitarian year zero. He called it, Pol Pot called it, political movement that took over. Yeah. The brutality of that, the savagery of that. That's probably that in 2003. But no, I think it's also Laos. It's also Vietnam. But yeah, the killing fields of Cambodia is probably the lowest moment in the American empire. That's probably the worst crime ever committed by the empire, I would say. Well, no, there's Japan. Sorry, what am I saying? Well, I don't know though. That's a tough. Cambodia versus Dresden, versus Nagasaki. I don't know.
Well, here's another historical question. We have Japanese internment happening, and with your historical take on the Holocaust, if we have Japanese interned as our enemies in the late 40s, imagine we start losing the war and getting low on resources. What do you think happens to all those Japanese in those camps? How do you think the United States would treat them if we start being pushed to an emergency state and don't have the resources to humanely feed them, and we see them as our enemies? And
is this a Gaza allegory? Is this a Gaza analogy?
It's a Holocaust analogy. I think the internment camps that we had in the United States are kind of similar to the work camps that predated the final solution. And the final solution was something that was enacted upon in desperation in the final years of the war when Germany was losing the war on two fronts.
Yeah. And, I mean, I've said this like 50 times on here, but yeah, I mean, the Holocaust began the day after the United States declared war on Germany. And this is because for years, Hitler had been telling the US and the West, we will not kill the Jews. We will keep the Jews. We will not kill them unless you go to war with us. And he kept his word for the most part. He never issued orders to kill Jews. In fact, he issued orders to not kill Jews. In the summer of 41, when they invaded the Soviet Union, he issued orders. There were lots of killing of Jews, but he was opposed to that at the time. But as soon as the U.S. said, yeah, we're going to war with you, then he said, yeah, flip the switch on the death camps. And they started gassing Jews on December 9th, the day after. So yeah. No, they wanted forced migration. It's amazing. They wanted exactly what Israel wants in Gaza and the West Bank. They want to force them out, not to kill them. That's why I hesitate to say it's genocide. I mean, I understand why people say it's genocide, and technically it is, according to the UN definition. But I think that's not actually the fundamental objective. I think some people wouldn't mind killing all of them, But what I've heard is consistently not killing them all, but I have heard consistently, yes, ethnic cleansing, removing them all, which is exactly what the Nazi policy was toward the Jews. It wasn't to kill them, it was to move them out expeditiously. That was their policy from 1919, when the Nazi Party was formed, until 1941, December 8th. And then they started killing them. But for that whole time, that they were really committed to migrating them out, just like what Israel wants to do. These children of the Holocaust, and even Holocaust survivors still in Israel, even in the Israeli government, there are Holocaust survivors in the Israeli government. Who are now doing to the Palestinians exactly what was done to them. It's incredible how they're reenacting both the Holocaust and the Old Testament. Like if you look at pictures together from Gaza, it looks just like the Israelites marching through the desert, being thrown out by the Pharaoh, or it looks like Jews in a camp, yeah. I mean, it's when they had all those guys, when they had stripped all those guys naked and had them kneel down in front of that big trench. And I was like, I mean, they did not shoot them all. And I think they let go most of them, but I was just like, do you all really think, and there were the pro-Israel people on Twitter actually cheering about this?
Well, they staged a surrender of weapons. Like they had one guy bring a rifle over his head, and
a dude who was like 70 years old.
Yeah.
He was gray. He was older than me, gray hair, in his underwear. They clearly gave him that rifle and said, okay, and
then
Ahmad,
do it again.
Out. Yeah, right. And then do it. And then he did it twice. Yeah. They found out they got busted, and people realized they did it twice. I mean, the propaganda coming out of the IDF, coming out of Israel, is shockingly stupid. Who do they think we are? And they're just not fooling anyone except for their true believers. And again, I'm really sorry to say, some of my friends.
Back to the poor, endangered Jewish students on American college campuses.
Yeah.
And Barry Weiss also, there's a connection here. Bill Ackman, who is the self-appointed savior of all the poor, unsafe Jewish kids on college campuses, is being championed by a lot of people sort of on our anti-woke side. And I'm going to play this clip here because he's equivocating diversity, equity, inclusion, quote unquote, wokeness with anti-Semitism. And I think this is the move that Barry Weiss makes, and why she was one of the first people to split with the New York Times. And
this is not just a Harvard problem. And it's an NYU problem. It's a University of Pennsylvania problem. The more I examine the issue, the more woke, the more left-leaning the institution, the more anti-Semitism, which is a very unfortunate thing.
There's a theory which is not held by an insignificant number of people, that Ashkenazi Jews are not Semites.
Well, they look like they're from Eastern Europe.
Bill Ackman is Semitic. His people are from that part of the world. Really? I don't think so.
The deeper conspiracy theory is that they're from Ukraine, and that's why they have the similar defending of Ukraine as their actual homeland. But
yeah, but I mean, I've been sort of looking at Israeli society more and more and more recently, and I was watching Israeli TV shows too before this happened, and it's really striking. I mean, the difference between the Mizrahi Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews is so striking. And by the way, the Mizrahi Jews, who are the Jews from the Middle East and Persia, who came into Israel late in the 60s, they vote right wing, and the Ashkenazi are generally left wing, which is interesting because the Mizrahi were basically the blacks of Israel, along with the Palestinians, but they were like the blacks among the Jews anyway, and really discriminated against. by the Ashkenazi, and the Mizrahi had no political power for decades. And still, I mean, look at all the prime ministers and presidents and major political leaders in Israel. They all look like me. So the Mizrahi, though, recently came into power, and they've been right wing all along, and they're like big in the settlement movements. A lot of the settlers are Mizrahi. The IDF, the frontline troops, if anyone's noticed, take a look at the frontline troops, the guys in the Golani Brigade, and those guys are actually going into Gaza. They're brown. A lot of them are brown Mizrahi. And they're right wing. And I'm trying to get a read on why that is. And apparently there's not a lot of clarity about this, but one of the leading theories is that it's because the labor movement, the labor government, the left wing, discriminated against them. We're just sort of outwardly racist against the Mizrahi. And so they're sort of anti-labor and see labor, the left wing, as just essentially selling out this country and, surrendering to the enemy. And that's why they're right. So the current government is seen as the first Mizrahi government, even though Netanyahu's Ashkenazi. But a lot of his government is now Mizrahi for the first time, and this is the true right wing of Israel, Israeli Jews. It's wild, and they're the real Semites. They're definitely Semites. Yeah.
Daryl Cooper Martyr made the point that the first settlers in 1948, a lot of people have this in their heads that they were, huddled families coming fresh from the Holocaust, but they were really European
socialist,
military-aged men ready to do some fighting and ready to take some land by force.
They were political activists. That's what they were. I mean, our political activists today, it's those people demographically who were the Zionists who actually settled Israel and who went to war and did all the fighting and killing and displacing of the Arabs. So
also, it's funny, real quick, you point out that the Ashkenazi are more left-wing in Israel because, like, if you look at us, like, our position is basically the position of Haaretz, and Haaretz is pretty much all Ashkenazi. Like, we've been citing Haaretz pretty much as the great oppositional voice throughout this whole conflict. And
this is one of the reasons why is the whole Zionism is so fraudulent from the ground up. Theodore Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, of the State of Israel, was never a believer in Judaism. He was an atheist. And he lived in Vienna. David Ben-Gurion, the founder of the State of Israel, the first prime minister, president, he was an atheist. He did not believe in Judaism. He did not attend a synagogue. In fact, Herzl and Ben-Gurion and all of the early Zionists and all of the early political leaders of Israel looked down on religious Jews. And my Israeli friends, too, make fun of and look down on the religious Jews. That's like people who live in Tel Aviv, like my friend in grad school lives in Tel Aviv. I asked him if he goes to Jerusalem ever, and he said, "Oh no, it's where all the religious people are." It's like, wait, so then what is this? Then what is a Jew? But then we also have the fact that the Ashkenazi were just a bunch of socialist revolutionaries who found a cause, a way to conquer a place and run it, sort of every revolutionary's fantasy under a very righteous banner at the time. It was a good look in the 1940s to be founding a Jewish state. But then the Ashkenazi, right? The people who founded this state and still essentially run it, there is a solid argument and just a whole lot of just very clear visual evidence that the Ashkenazi, either on everyone's way out of Africa, everybody came, they didn't go through that part of the Middle East. They went sort of directly to Eastern Europe. That's my so-called Jewish family. Odessa, which was part of Russia then. We didn't go through the Levant. We didn't go up past the Mediterranean. We went straight up to, or very more directly there. We didn't pass through there. And our skin didn't change because of it, because we never lived in the desert. We never lived. You look like I do if your ancestors did not live in a desert. Come on now. Bibi Netanyahu is from, really, his family really is from that part of the world, really. It's so fraudulent. It's amazing. And again, I plead with everyone to listen to my interview with Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, my favorite episode of the year, one of my favorite of all time. This is where he just really pulls the rug out from under Zionism. There is zero intellectual basis for the thing. It has no intellectual integrity whatsoever. The entire thing rests upon mysticism. You have to believe that the Bible says that these people should live in this place. That's it. They always end up there in that place. Everybody, the most secular, progressive, scientific, pro-Israel Zionist, that's where they end. The argument always ends up there.
Well, yeah, the Bible, regardless of whether or not they adhere to the teachings of the Torah, whether or not they take up their commands by God to follow.
Yeah. Well, they use it as like, I know my friend who's like a Marxist atheist who lives in Tel Aviv. That's what he said. I asked him, like, what's up with why are you doing this? And he's from California, like, and he decided, that's what's so crazy to me. But he said because the land, I think he said because the land belongs to us, or we belong in this land. I'm like, wait, so then I belong in Scotland, like, and Ukraine. What?
Well,
I mean,
this is what is going to lead to chants of blood and soil. If one race of people are allowed to view themselves as a race and are allowed to make blood and soil arguments for themselves,
and build nation states around the blood and soil argument,
build nation states
and displace millions of people for the blood and soil argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then it ends poorly.
Yeah. Well, then don't be surprised when so-called Christian nationalists show up in this country and say that this is a white country that we are destined to own because of manifest destiny, and that we should displace whoever we want to because God gave this land to us. Like,
exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. The precedent is not something anyone wants. Mm-hmm. This is what we all need to think about. This is not in anyone's interest to establish a precedent where it's cool. And by the way, a lot of the pro-Israel people just think it's cool. Honestly, they're pro-Israel because they think Israel's cool. Because they've been there and the chicks are hot and like Tel Aviv is a fun place and there's like great bars and restaurants and cafes and yada yada. I forget what I was going to say. But if you think something about thinking it's cool, but it's really oh right. I mean, it's establishing a precedent that can end in very bad ways. It's sort of like, it's similar to opposing speech rights for certain people, right, at certain times. Like, for instance, all these liberals, so-called, like Bari Weiss, who started her whole thing. What's her thing called? It's called the Free Press. And her whole career started, she was like a free speech warrior. Mm-hmm. She's now saying, of course, that we should not be allowed to say free Palestine. No, this will redound to your discredit. You will suffer from this because, again, as you just said, brother Michael, the Christians will come, or maybe the Muslims will come and claim the same rights. Hey, yo, we need an ethno state in San Diego, motherfucker, or wherever Bari Weiss lives. No, we gotta have a caliphate where you live, Barry, because our people. We discovered a document that shows that our ancestors lived in Orange County in the, in the Stone Age. So this is our land, honey. We come very first. There's protozoa evidence from here that we can link to ourselves. So we should have a settlement where you're living. That is the Israeli argument. It is wild. It's psychedelic. I mean, it's really, and one of the funny things about Israeli culture, Israeli society, is that it's very hippie. It's very hippie. Like every time I see into like an Israeli home through a TV screen, like on a show or something that's sort of realistic, they always look like that. They all look like really bohemian, hippie, California. Like it very much looks like my world that I grew up in California in the 1970s. Very sort of, quote, laid back. It's known for that. And my friend said he moved there in large part because of its so-called down-to-earth lifestyle. And it really does seem like that. And that's part of why LGBTQ is so huge there. And it's also why like drugs and weed is huge there. Oh God. Do you see the Hamas video of them killing a guy smoking a bong? An IDF soldier. An IDF soldier.
That might get the Republicans. That might get the Republicans to finally throw some support towards Hamas.
Man, right? Yeah. No, it's one of their. You've seen their videos, right? And it's like the IDF soldier's like in a window in a building smoking a bong, and then it's like RPG, boom. Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, maybe that's why Israel is bombing them from afar and not fighting them on the ground.
Oh, well, the Palestinians and then the sort of hard left, and I'm not sure they're wrong, but the hard left on this question, they talk about Israel being a cowardly army and a cowardly country all the time. That's a central theme on sort of the very serious pro-Palestinian side. And there's a lot to that argument. Yeah, I mean, they do a whole lot of remote killing. The fact that Israel invented the drone is pretty big piece of evidence in favor of that argument that they're a cowardly country. I mean, hey, well, they value life more than Palestinians do. Come on, man, give them a break. Palestinians love to kill their babies. You knew that, right?
Yeah.
People actually believe that shit. And yes, I've seen the videos of the woman saying, she would be proud for her baby to be a martyr, and happy. And like, okay. Do you really think she's going to be? I mean, if you watch any other video of Palestinian moms and women and Palestinian people in general, they venerate babies and children more than anyone in the West does, frankly. Venerate. So it's so crazy and racist. Sorry, I had to say that.
One thing I put in the description, Alex Jones is back on Twitter /X.
Oh boy.
And I think it's notable because, Twitter was a platform, if everybody remembers 5 years ago, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, everything all at once on the exact same day. We're supposed to believe completely independently also. Kicked Alex Jones off permanently on the same day. It was like the most Orwellian moment of censorship. I remember that day. I was like, he's gone. I downloaded banned video on my phone that day. Yeah.
And this speaks to how important that was. I can't believe he was ever on Twitter because I don't remember him on Twitter. Like they erased him from my memory somehow, meaning it's been 5 years of zero press. Like Milo too. Like Milo went from being the #1 most talked about person in our world. He was bigger than Joe Rogan for a while there. That year, so he was bigger than Rogan.
Well, Bill Maher called him a young, spry, young Christopher Hitchens type character. Like he was becoming a darling. Yeah,
there were riots in Berkeley that shut down the city because of him. I mean, no, he was bigger than Rogan that year. He was huge. I haven't thought about him. He hasn't entered my brain more than 3 times in the last 5 years. So canceling people really worked, it turns out. But now it's the comeback. By the way, why is Milo not back on Twitter? He should have been the first. He was the
yeah.
first martyr. He should be the first back on, right?
So,
And he got really shafted. Like, he didn't say anything hard. I mean, God, it was mild what he was saying about Leslie Jones or whatever it was.
bring back Milo and bring back Nick Fuentes. If we're going to be doing,
I thought he was on. I thought Fuentes was on.
For a while, his what is it? Dark Legend.
I thought he was Autumn Groiper. No.
No, I don't think so. Well, that might be a burner I don't know about. But for a while, his burner was on, but then that burner got banned. And yeah, bring back his original account.
I thought Autumn Groiper was at least sounding like him.
Well, there's a lot of Groipers out there that basically are him in spirit.
Yeah, but smart enough to be him. Like Autumn Groiper is very smart. I think shouldn't go too deep into that. But anyway, yeah. So Alex Jones. What's going to happen now? My God. Elon Musk. Why do you want this job, bro? I mean, think about how does he runs? Who's the big like Marvel super villain who wants to run the universe?
Thanos.
Right. Dude is actually Thanos. It's wild. That rocket that he just blew up after the test launch, it's the biggest rocket in history. That's the largest by far, I think, too. It's the largest rocket ever assembled in history. I mean, listen, like multiple countries have had space programs for decades. He's already got the biggest rocket ever. That's scary. Do you see the size of that fucking thing? I mean, it can carry a lot of good and it can carry a lot of bad. You feel me? I mean, it's scary. It's like they're going to be delivering cars across the ocean in those. You know, that's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole transportation system is going to be revolutionized according to Silicon Valley people who know stuff about this. And I guess according to Elon, that's what it's going to be. Like cargo. This is going to be cargo shipments on rockets across the world. Automobiles will be shipped from Seoul, South Korea to Los Angeles in a rocket. Now, that's cool so long as they don't crash on somebody, number one. And number two, what if they're loaded with things other than SUVs that, aren't friendly to human beings?
Or
like weapons, bombs, bioweapons. I don't know.
What if he chooses to become the world's biggest weapons contractor and just sells those rockets to the highest bidder?
And then maybe that's what's most concerning is that, bro, like isn't he basically John Galt too? I've never read this thing, but I mean, he's that figure, right? He's that kind of figure. So like, okay, so it was cool and fun and games when you were like digging tunnels under LA and building your first little spaceships and shit. And the electric car was nifty. But now that you've taken over Twitter, we're getting a window into your mind. Now we know that you want to take over the basic infrastructure of the global political economy: transportation, communication. I mean, it's intense. And we've seen into dude's mind now for a couple of years quite clearly. And he's revealed some things that scare the shit out of me. That I don't want anyone with those ideas to have any kind of power, but he's really the very first capitalist to accrue that kind of power. Where have you noticed? Like Netanyahu stopped on a dime and like spent the entire day with Elon Musk in the middle of the war, like a week ago or 2 weeks, right? And Elon was just like, yo, I'm coming. And the whole country, Israel, just welcomed him during a war. And he has that power. Ukraine, like the fact that he gave Starlink to Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, was crucial to Ukraine holding out in the first months of the war.
And right now, what if he gives Starlink to Gaza?
And he said he would. He did announce that. He said he would about a week ago. I don't know though. I mean, that's a different issue though. But yeah, but I mean, that's just kind of power that like JP Morgan didn't have. JP Morgan financed World War I essentially, you know, and other imperial adventures for sure, which is no small matter. But Elon Musk he possesses more power than JP Morgan because JP Morgan didn't have truly global instantaneous power. That's what Elon's got. Like if he wants to stop a war, he just gets on a plane and goes to Israel. If he wanted to stop it, he could have, you know, or at least have a major influence on it. Like it's like that. He can change things anywhere in the world. JP didn't quite have that power. It's omniscience. It's omnipotence. It's scary. It does look like a Marvel supervillain now. And we also know that he has some profound authoritarian tendencies in the way that he manages and governs Twitter. He bans things capriciously. He realizes, oh, that sounds not cool to me. All right, that's banned. Like from the river to the sea, apparently. We're not allowed to say that. Or free Palestine. Those are genocidal, according to Elon Musk. He thinks that bullshit, which is the most authoritarian Orwellian shit I've ever heard of. It not only is Orwellian in its manipulation of language and dishonesty, it's doing so in the service of a genocide of children. So that's about as bad as it gets. You know, I mean, grossly violating the First Amendment, using Orwellian logic to defend the slaughter of children. All right. And with that, good night. Yeah, man, we got to go though. So Unregistered Live. We hang out on a Zoom meeting after Unreported every week, starting right now. And if you want to join us and hang out and talk on Zoom, you don't have to show yourself. You don't have to put your name down. You can be completely, utterly anonymous and unknown and unseen if you want to. But if you want to hang out and either watch or join in, go to patreon.com/unregistered right there, that URL, and join at any level as a patron. And click that URL that's in the feed today on Patreon and join us. Michael, thank you so much, my friend, my brother.
Yeah.
Great work. Yeah. Man, I hope this issue, I just hope the war ends for so many reasons, but it actually negatively affects the mood. It's really not a fun, not good for the soul. Talking about this all the time, thinking about it. But I know you vibe with that.
I vibe with that heavy.
All right,
as the kids say.
Totally. All right, man. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks. See ya.
Peace.